Hey folks, in this video I'm going to introduce the concept of a system call. So, okay, let's think for a second. In the past we've already written plenty of programs, right? So you guys have done your programming in Java, done some programming in C, maybe even other languages. Now, when you create your programs, you typically write, maybe some sort of a main method, right? Or a main function, and then you write other functions to support it. Great, good stuff. In your main function, you make calls to the other functions you've written, right? So if I have, this main method, right, that just, maybe sets a scene, I have another thing that maybe displays like an intro screen, I could maybe call that second function from the first one, right? So I have main calls, show intro. Good stuff. This is just a function call. Now, in addition to function calls, we also have this new idea of what is called a system call, right? So a system call is basically sort of like a library call, right? So you've already seen the idea maybe of a library, right? So maybe you're working in Java, you're like, oh, I need to do something, right? I don't want to implement it. Somebody else has already implemented it. Let me see if there's a library that has it, and you'll make a call to a library, right? So imagine you, for example, implementing a GUI interface, right? You're not going to actually write a GUI from scratch. You're going to basically use a library and make calls to it to ask it to do things. So you're going to say, oh, hey, library, can I use your call to create a button? Or can I use it to create an image? Or can I use it to show the screen? Those are library calls. Now, this is kind of a, well, not quite a parallel, not quite orthogonal either. But this is kind of a related idea, right? It was the idea basically of a system call, right? So actually, maybe I'll diagram this a little bit before we go on. So you imagine you have a program, right? So you have a program, and you have, for example, you have this main method, right? And then your program, you maybe have something called, we'll call it a function just A. And this is your program. And you could, for example, just call from main, you could call A, right? So you're making a function call. That's fine, good stuff. And then you also have, right, maybe the idea of a library. Say this library has function B, right? This is a library over here. And you could also basically call, from your program to the library. Okay, maybe main calls B, maybe you have another one over here called C, and maybe A calls C, okay? So I have my program, library, right? So this is a library call. Yeah, library call. Call this LC, library call. Okay, so normally, right, you write your program has some stuff in it. Sometimes you want somebody else to do something for you, so you make a call to that library, okay? Now, there's actually kind of another type of call, right? And this is what we call maybe a system call. So we'll call this actually the operating system. This is the operating system itself. Operating system. And maybe I have X and Y. So I'm actually going to draw a little line here. This maybe is user stuff versus this is kernel stuff, right? So this is basically internals of your operating system, okay? Now, your program can actually make these system calls, right? So you can think of the system calls as basically being another library, but it's a library that the operating system is responsible for implementing, right? So your operating system is the only one that knows how to do things like talk to specific hardware, so it's actually going to provide the library backend kind of to let your program do stuff, right? And that's going to be what we call a system call, right? So I'm using a library basically that the operating system is managing because it's a piece of functionality that's so low level, the operating system is the only part of your system that knows how to deal with it, okay? And so you can make system calls. Libraries can also make system calls, right? So your program, libraries, those are kind of user level things, right? That somebody, just a general programmer implemented versus things that are super specialized. Those are things that your operating system supports, right? And so this, right, is what you need a system call for. System call. All right. And this is also a system call as well. So we'll do system call, system call. All right, so this is kind of a basic idea, right? This is the notion of a system call. It's a low-level piece of functionality, right? That maybe your program runs, maybe a library runs, right? So it's analogous to libraries you've been using, but it's something that the operating system itself is implemented. All right, so that's our basic idea here. So a system call, right, is typically something that is a operation, right, that maybe interacts with your hardware at a low level, right? Or maybe requires a high level of privilege, right? Basically, it's something that your operating system should be the provider of, right? It's something that the operating system should do, right? I shouldn't let a normal program do this thing. I should make my OS do it. And in a future video, we'll actually go through and we'll list for you guys some examples of what that could be, right? But for now, just think of it as being something that requires a high level of privilege, high level of responsibility, something that only the OS should do, right? That's our idea of a system call. right? And then obviously, right, either I have a user program or I have a library. Both those could make system calls. All right, so here we have an example of a program, right? We have some simple pseudocode. This is very, very basic pseudocode. To me, I'm actually not that fond of this format. It's a little bit hand-wavy. This is very, very vacuous pseudocode. All right, so what this is basically an example of a program for making a copy of a file, okay? So I have my input here, right? My output over here. So what do we want to talk about here? What we want to do is basically get a sense of what our system calls, okay? So let's assume I have this program here, and I can just look from top to bottom and see what it's doing, okay? So let's see, it's acquiring file input name, writing a prompt to the screen, accepting input, acquiring output, writing the name to the file to the screen, accepting input. Let's see, open input file, create output file, loop, right? Read, write until it fails or it's the end of it. Output completion message, terminate, right? So this is basically just a program for making a copy, right? So we ask for file name for input, ask for file name for output, do the copy, display a completion message. So this is a simple program, right? It's a simple program that relies on system calls, okay? So this is one thing maybe we can think about, right? Is if you think in terms of a program, some things in it will require a system call and some of them won't, right? So some things are really simple. So for example, if I add 10 to a variable, that's not a system call. I don't need the operating system's permission to do that. But if I do something like, for example, create an input file, yeah, I'm going to need to talk to the OS because I need to go to the file system and create a new file there, right? So that's going to be, for sure, a system call. So there's kind of this difference, right? Some things are system calls, some things are not, based on do they require privilege or not, right? So let's see. Just try to go through here, right? And I'll try to basically identify what are these calls, perhaps, right? So we have things like over here, right? So initially, right, we, for example, we acquire input, right? So we ask the user for something. That involves talking with the keyboard. That's probably going to be a system call, okay? So reading from the keyboard, writing to the screen, right? These are all going to be operations that are some sort of a system call, right? So these are what we call, basically are dealing with fetching the parameters, right? So reading from the screen, right? Reading from the keyboard, writing to the screen, right? Those are going to be system calls. So read file name, display, right? Because those resources, right, are things that basically, reading from the keyboard. I have different programs I want to read from the keyboard. I have, that sense where I'm interacting with hardware at a low level. Probably going to need to have the OS do it for me. I'm going to go to the OS and say, oh, give me the next string, right, and the OS will figure it out and give it back to me. Same thing for displaying something, right? The OS is the only one that knows about that monitor. I'm going to tell the OS, display this stuff on the screen, right, and the OS will go handle it. So these, right, look like they're going to be things that are basically system calls. Let's see, opening files, right? Again, it's going to be something that interacts with our system at a low level, right? Reading and writing to a file, system calls. Copying it, right? This is, again, right, file manipulation, system calls. Closing the file, right, system call, because it's something to do with low-level files again, right? So this is basically file I/O here. So this is file I/O versus keyboard mouse I/O. Then this is keyboard I/O again, keyboard mouse I/O. System stuff. I don't know. Yeah, system stuff. I'll just be very technical there. Okay, so somehow the idea here is this. All these things we're showing are candidates for system calls because they all require interacting with something that the OS is going to be the only thing that knows how to do it, right? Because it's so low level, right? Interacting with hardware, interacting with keyboard, your monitor, your hard drive. These are the only things that the OS knows how to do. All right, so this is our program, right? And in the future, basically what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit more about what these are specifically, right? So we're going to give some specific examples of what system calls are. All right, for now, kind of focus on this idea, right, of a system call is something that requires high level privilege, and that's something that you could either be invoked by your program or by a library, right? And then the OS will take care of it.